there guys, Epic PC Guy here, and this will be a video about benchmarks and when they matter, why do they not matter sometimes, and about real use. Now, a lot of people might be thinking that I'm doing this, so saying, hey guys, ignore all the benchmarks and reviews that you see out there, but that's not the case. This is more a video about using common sense to figure out what is the best product for you with also the help of benchmarks, but not being solely guided by them. Uh, I don't have a lot of footage to show. It's mostly an opinion piece and an explanation piece. So bear with me. You'll be bearing with this fugly face around here for a few minutes. And let's start by saying that when I do my research for what I want to buy for myself, I do consult benchmarks, obviously. They're a very valuable tool. They show you how a product performs under load on a specific field, be it noise or temperatures or performance. And they are definitely very useful, and they should definitely be kept in mind. However, we have to keep in mind that it is not really a match for what will happen in the real world, and it is not even a match for what will probably happen in your case. Now, let's start over by saying what are benchmarks? What is a stress test? A benchmark is a synthetic load that pushes an aspect or another of your PC to the utmost extreme, puts it at 100% load, and sees how it behaves. It is used primarily to test performance and to test stability when you are, for example, overclocking. I have shown in a video in the past how to stress test your PC to make sure your overclock on your CPU is stable. I'll link it in the description or up in the card or something like that so you guys can check. In any case, that pushes your PC, your CPU in that case, to the max. Uh, and the thing is, that max is not a max that you will encounter in real life. When you run a benchmark like that, you are running your CPU, in this case a CPU or GPU or something else, you are running it at 100% capability, full on load, for full load max frequency for many minutes, eventually hours, perhaps if you are really wanting to make sure it's stable. And that's something that's not going to happen in real life. You're not going to have your PC at 100% load for 3 hours. You're not even going to have your PC at 100% load for like 10 minutes, most likely. And while it is important to know what your hardware is capable of, it's not something that you have to really keep in mind. It is important to know because if one hardware performs better under that load, it will probably also perform better on lower loads. However, while performance benchmarks are important, things like thermal benchmarks, they are important, but you cannot take them as gospel because, like I said, it's not going to be at 100% all the time for that extended period of time. Even if you are doing something very intensive like editing videos, rendering videos, or gaming, uh, it's not going to be completely at 100% all the time. And yes, it will heat up more than on idle, obviously. And when it is at 100% load, it will be quite hot as long as it is under the safe limit, which is for CPUs and GPUs on the high 80s, high 90s, depending on the piece you have. As long as it is under that, it is still safe. As well as when the load is not at 100%, because it will be at 100% for a minute or two, or for a few seconds, or whatever, and then it will drop down to lower levels. And when it does, it will give it some time to cool down for your fans or your water cooling or whatever you have cooling your parts. It will drop the temperature a little bit in that time, and it will keep it under control anyway. So do keep it in mind, but be realistic about it. Think about it and think about how much load you are actually going to be putting your system under. I apologize for all the cutting that and editing that will be done to this video, but apparently my neighbors feel like drilling. So you might hear some noises and I might have to cut the video here and there, so apologies. Little disclaimer. I'll go back to the topic. Another important thing to keep in mind is what kind of use will you be giving to your PC? Are you going to be using it for very high-end stuff, like hardcore video editing at a 4K resolution or 8K resolution, or are you going to just play some games and not even very demanding games? That is something that you have to keep in mind, because if you are going to be playing mostly just some games at not very demanding resolutions like 1080p, 1440, something like that, at 60 hertz, then well, you might want a good graphics card or a good CPU. Uh, you're better off going more for the budget version as opposed to going for the version that has better cooling capabilities, for example. And I'm talking mostly in the field of, for example, graphics cards. You'll have the same graphics cards. Let's say um, I don't know, a GTX 1660 Ti. You'll have the same graphics cards in different designs from different manufacturers, be it with one fan, for example, or three fans overclocked, one fan blower style. You'll have all those variations, and the price between those variations will be quite different as well. You'll have the variations with LED lights and all that. So you have to keep in mind what use you'll be giving it to it. Are you going to be overclocking it or not? And if not, you can still get a 1660 Ti, but you might as well get a cheaper one with one fan or two, as opposed to getting one with three fans and paying an extra premium for it. Will the benchmarks say that your card will have worse thermal performance and perform hotter? Probably. Will it say that it will overclock less? Not less, but not overclock as far without thermal throttling or something? Probably, but in your specific use case, is that relevant? That's something that you have to keep in mind and that you have to ask yourself in terms of building a system that is both good for you and is not super expensive. Because as much as we all, myself included, usually want the best of the best on our PCs, there is such a thing as wanting money for other things in life. And if it's not going to, if the performance is going to be wasted and not utilized, then why bother? Uh, that's something that you have to keep in mind when building your system, obviously. Other very important thing that you need to keep in mind as well when looking at benchmarks and the such is the unique features and possibly brand specific software that comes attached to a specific part of a specific component. This goes true for mostly uh, not CPUs but other components like say motherboards, graphics cards and RAM and possibly fans and coolers and such, is that there are features that do not necessarily add performance, but are unique to that part. And you kind of have to, if you want those features, perhaps I'll try to give you a good example. RGB lighting, for example, on RAM, on graphics cards, on motherboard. Let's say that you really want an RGB lit component. You might want one that has a specific type of lighting in a specific place. But if you go look at benchmarks, maybe it will be performing a bit less than the other that has no RGB lighting. Uh, you have to kind of figure out for yourself a little bit. Is that performance drop so big that it will actually have an impact, or is it a theoretical performance difference that you probably won't really notice while you're using your computer? Those features, while not adding performance, they do add value, and a value in a thing like this is subjective. It's a perceived value. What is valuable to you might not be valuable to me, and vice versa. So you kind of have to figure out for yourself what do you value more, if it's the raw performance or if it's the added feature. Now, RGB lighting is maybe not the best option, not the best example, because it's something very subjective. Some people hate it, some people like it. But let's give it a more concrete example, like on a motherboard, for example. Maybe that motherboard is a slightly weaker VRM, and maybe you will want to overclock, but not extensively. So, oh no, my chip will be running a bit warmer, or I might need to have a bit more voltage. But on the other hand, it does have those I don't know, throwing things out there. That might have that little extra USB 3.0 header that I kind of wanted for this and that, or it has an extra PCIe Express that I could use for a sound card later on if I wanted. Maybe it has extra USB ports at the back or a Thunderbolt port or something. That's handy for whatever. That is something that you have to keep in mind because Sure, the benchmarks might say that it's slightly worse, but is it so much worse that it justifies you not going for that part and going for the theoretical better, but then having quality of life issues with not having enough USB ports, for example? It's just an example. And having to have a USB hub loose on top of your desk to connect stuff to, or having to add an extra expansion card because your sound card isn't to your standards, even though the rest of the board is. So that is the kind of thing that I mention when I am talking about subjective value and real use case, because what is valuable to you and to us as consumers is not always something that can be measured on a table and on a graph. And although that does compare the quality of a certain aspect of the board, it does not cover the more subjective things can be that can have different values for you or for me as words are difficult. I know. Uh, that's what I get when I try to do a video without script and without a lot of cuts and just try to keep it rolling. In any case, I think I've gotten my point across. There are things that you cannot measure with benchmarks. Benchmarks are important, stress tests are important to know which is the better performance value for your money and to know which part is better when comparing one part against another. However, like I said, there are things that are very personal and that sometimes are more important than a small performance hit or a small performance boost. Because when you are comparing similar tier components, usually the difference is not massive. In things like graphics cards, perhaps, because of the cooling capabilities and the power limits. However, in other components like motherboards, not so much. So, my own advice is things like, for example, CPUs, it's important to look at benchmarks. Very important, because there's not a lot of external subjective things to worry about. It's just the performance, the thermals, the stability. That's it. That's all that there is to a CPU. Other things get a bit murkier with the all the added value things. Graphics cards, there's the cooling to keep in mind, the noise levels, and possibly the RGB lighting that are a bit more subjective. If you're going to water cool, the cooling doesn't matter, but neither does the noise levels from the fans. But the RG, if you are not going to water cool, then the cooling matters a little bit. The noise levels matter a bit more, and the RGB levels, well, that's up to you. Motherboards, same story. There might be slight differences between same tiered motherboards, but it's very, very also tied with the rest of the features, with the ports that it has, with the USB headers inside and the other headers, with the RGB synchronization. There is a lot of things that you kind of really have to keep in mind. And I really hate my neighbors right now, even more than I usually do, because this is really distracting me. I'm gonna cut it short, and I don't know if you guys can hear the drill, but I can. I don't see the little mic line going higher when they drill, but so I don't know if you guys can actually hear it, but I cannot even hear myself think sometimes. So I think I got my point across. Do by all means look at benchmarks. Do by all means see what they say and use them to inform yourself and see what is the best part available. But on the other hand, think for yourself, what do you value more, and does that part have things that I want, or are there other parts from other manufacturers that also have things that I want and that are perhaps not much worse. So, don't follow them blindly. It's all I wanted to say. This has been Ethic PC Guy with another of his long, rambling, boring videos where it's just looking at him all the time. Sorry about that. If you enjoyed this video and thought it was useful, like, share, subscribe, share it with your friends. Let's get a few more people around here talking to each other, commenting. Leave a comment if you enjoyed this video or have something to say. And yeah, that is your way to support it if you like my content. So I will see you next time.